What's up, gamers? We're coming in a little bit late. I was traveling for my own event this last weekend, and I got in late Monday night, so I did not have time, of course, to look over Best Coast pairings and all that fun stuff. So, after recording several other things today, let's go ahead and talk about what happened over the last weekend. So to start off with, it was an okay weekend. We had a 44.5% win rate, but it was a relatively low average and low median elo weekend. So I'm actually pretty surprised at how well we did with that in mind, considering how many of our stronger players were at teams events and how few of them were actually going to singles events this last weekend. There were a couple decent sized events like Games Workshop Maastricht over in the Netherlands, but it was mostly teams events, particularly in the US this last weekend, that really took off. So we'll have a lot of those to be talking about as we get into it. To start off with, let's go ahead and talk about one of my favorite archetypes of guard right now. Do note that as of the time of recording, basically no events have been allowing any of the new stuff. So we're not going to be seeing any hippogriffs, we're not going to be seeing Yark, we're not going to be seeing any of that kind of stuff. We're starting to see it pop up a little bit in RTTs, and it is all absolutely ridiculous. But for now, we're going to be looking at the stuff that was available pre-release. There's a couple of places that were allowing the new detachments, but without the new data sheets, a lot of the new stuff is not particularly interesting. So with Doombolt Guard, of course, we have been used to seeing this quite a bit. Let's go ahead and get right into it. If you are interested in seeing more about it, of course, there's a guide from probably about a month ago at this point that you guys should go check out. To start off with, we have Duncan Blum going to ATC Carolina, where he was playing pretty close to the two Doran variant of Doombolt that I have been recommending to a lot of different players. It's Kading Castellan, Kading Command Squad, two Silent Command Squads, Nork Deadog, two Rogaldorn Commanders, one unit of 20 Cadians, one unit of 10 Deathcore of Krieg, two Chimeras, and then where it diverges a little bit from the things that I generally recommend to people, it is one unit of 10 Rough Riders, one unit of 5 Death Riders, 3 units of Kazarkin, one unit of 5 Krieg Engineers, 2 units of 5 Scions. So, of course, the places where this is diverging is the fact that I very strongly recommend to people that you end up going with all 3 units of 5 Krieg Engineers instead of the Rough Riders or the Death Riders, and then I don't remember if this is exactly 2,000 points, but I can't imagine it is based on what I'm looking at, and then taking an extra unit of Battle Line instead of the Death Riders. However, of course, it is still good enough. You still have a strong enough core. You're just trading out a couple of pieces, and you have a little bit more damage in this variant than a couple of other different ways. Duncan ended up going 4-1 at the event, beating out Ultramarines, Guard, losing to Votan before beating another Guard player, and then beating Tau again towards the end of the event. So congratulations to Duncan Blum on having a good ATC. Moving over to China, we have Zifan Ju at, I don't know how to say any of this, but I'm going to call it the NCTC event, where he ended up going 4-0 at a team's event. And this is a very classic one Dorn Doombolt that we have been seeing. It has been very popular over in Europe. It's been a little bit popular in Asia. It's been very popular wherever WTC terrain has been played quite a bit. Zifan is going with the very classic version of the Kading Castellan, Kading Command Squad, 3 Sign Command Squads, Nork Deadog, and Ogrim Bodyguard, Rogaldorn Commander, 1 unit of 20 Cadians, 1 unit of 10 Krieg, 3 Chimeras, 3 units of Kazarkim, 3 units of 5 Krieg Engineers, 2 units of 5 Scions, and 1 unit of 10. And of course, big keys to this are you are going to be starting the brick of 10 Scions with Nork Deadog and a Scion Command Squad on the board. You're going to give it volley guns, and then you're going to be committing a lot of CP to making sure that it is going to be doing maximum damage. It's not uncommon to spend 2 or 3 command points on this unit all in one turn. Move, and to snap to it to give a second damage order. Then you're going to pop whichever one is more relevant between lethal hits and +1 strength, and ignores cover. So it's very common to spend 2 to 3 CP on this unit all in one go. The downside, of course, of trying to play this unit is if it gets tagged before it's activated, you lose. The game is over. There's nothing further you can do. It is very tough if that does end up happening. Moving over to, I believe this was in Finland, but definitely somewhere in Scandinavia, with Iro Sokonen at Kings of Sima going 5-0 with the exact same list that we saw from Sifan. Again, like I said, very common in places where they are playing WTC terrain. But Iro ends up going 20-0 into Chaos Knights, Death Guard, Imperial Knights again, and then 17-3 into Tau to close it out. Moving over to Home Nations, which was in, I believe it was in Ireland, Northern Ireland, if I remember correctly. We have Alex Fowler playing almost the exact same list. Only one small change between these two, whereas Sifon and Iro are playing just 1 unit of 10 Krieg and 3 units of 5 Krieg Engineers. Alex Fowler of Team England was playing 2 units of 10 Krieg and only 2 units of Krieg Engineers. just a slightly different variant, very similar overall in terms of capabilities. Alex Fowler's version is slightly better at holding up to primary, whereas the version that Eero and Tifon play are a little bit stronger in terms of pushing the actual board. Alex ended up going 3-2 at the event, losing to Deathwatch in a close game before beating Guard in a pretty big manner, losing to CSM really hard before beating Necrons in medium wins 2 times. Moving over to Hellstorm Gaming, which was also in the UK, we have Mark Pilkington, a player that I have not seen before. At least I don't believe so. Playing again a very similar thing overall. This was a very slight variation of what we've been seeing. It's a little bit more similar to the variant that I have recommended with the 2 Rogaldorns, but this one, Mark, instead of the one that Alex or Eero and Sifon were playing, chooses to change one of his units or one of his chimeras into a unit of Deathcore of Krieg. I'm not exactly sure what the point of this change really is, but it is, I do really think that the third Chimera is really valuable here. I don't remember seeing any enhancements on this one, so I was a little bit surprised. But overall, Mark ends up going 4-1, beating out Imperial Knights, Necrons, getting blown out by CSM for getting big and medium wins against Thousand Suns and Chaos Knights. Moving on, we have a bunch of Recon, which is growing in popularity significantly significantly over the past couple of weeks. And before I go too far, I do want to give a quick shout out here to Blake Chambers at NSO Teams of Thunder Tactics. Unfortunately, not quite making the cutoff, but Nemo asked for me to shout it out. So, Blake Chambers, if you're watching this, well done on the recon this last weekend. Okay, getting back into it, of course, Wesley's Hordes and all of the recon. Lots and lots of bodies. It ends up being an overwhelming number of bodies that are really obnoxiously difficult for your opponent to remove. Ton of OC, and does more damage than a lot of people really expect it to. The first one that we have at ATC Carolina, we have Lyle Dixon going 4 wins and 1 draw. He's running 2 Cadian Castellans, 3 Cadian Command Squads, a Commissar, Gaunt's 3 Ogren Bodyguards, Ursa Creed, 3 units of 20 Cadians, 1 unit of 20 Catachan, 1 unit of 20 Deathcore of Krieg, 4 additional units of 10 Deathcore of Krieg, 1 unit of 10 Rough Riders, 2 units of 5 Rough Riders, 3 units of 5 Krieg Engineers, and a Scout Sentinel. Lyle ended up beating Eldar 19-1, a draw against Dark Angels before getting big wins into Admech, Tau, and Tau again. Moving on, at ATC Carolina, we also have a couple of other players that were playing similar lists but did not have the same amount of success. The first one we have is Ben Eisenhoff going 2 wins, 2 losses, and a draw. 3 Cadian Castellans, 3 Cadian Command Squads, Gaunt's 3 Ogren Bodyguards, and Ursula Creed. So obviously the big thing here is there are 4 units of 20 Cadians. You attach just a Castellan to one of them, and it kind of comes off the board as kind of like Scions in a certain way, right? It's going to be 175 points. You get a similar amount of output, and you just have a lot of bodies that are obnoxiously difficult to remove. 1 unit of 20 Catachan, 4 units of 10 Deathcore of Krieg, 1 unit of 10 Rough Riders, 1 unit of 5 Death Riders, 3 units of 5 Krieg Engineers, 1 unit of 5 Rattlings, a Scout Sentinel, and Ben ended up going a draw into Town before small loss into Death Guard, a big win into Guard, a big loss into Ultras, and a medium win into Thousand Suns. Also, at the same event, we have Edward Apple, who I believe was playing almost the exact same list. The only changes between what Ben was playing and what Edward was playing is the fact that Ben had a unit of 5 Death Riders and Edward had a unit of 5 Rough Riders. Edward, at the same time, ended up getting a small loss into Orcs, a small win into Admech, a larger win into Tau, a draw into Emperor's Children, and a big loss into Emperor's Children. That's one of the few matchups I would not really recommend if you're trying to play Recon in a team's environment. You don't really want to make your Recon player play up against Emperor's Children. It is one of the few matchups where it actually gets really dicey, especially if they're playing a no defiler version. So not super surprised that this was a little bit of a struggle here for Edward. Moving on, we have me. This is me. I was playing at an event down in Orange County at OC5s. I was playing 3 Cadian Castellans, 3 Cadian Command Squads, Gaunt's 3 Ogren Bodyguards, Ursa Creed by herself, not attached to anything else, 3 units of 20 Cadians, 1 unit of 20 Catachan, 4 units of 10 Deathcore of Krieg, 2 units of 10 Rough Riders, 1 unit of 5 Death Riders, 3 units of 5 Krieg Engineers, 1 unit of 5 Rattlings, and a Scout Sentinel. Well, officially, I went 3 wins and a draw. Realistically, I only played 3 games. I beat Ultramarines 20-0, Sisters, 13-7, and 16-4 into Tau. The 10-10 that I had into Marines didn't really happen. We didn't really play this game. We played like a battle round and a half before we had some pretty big disagreements over how 40K is kind of supposed to be played. I will have more information on that later this week when I do a breakdown of the games that I actually played. So if you're interested in more information about that, make sure you tune in. Moving on, we have a bunch of piles of tanks where I'm going to be including some of the what I would normally be like Dorns and Vanquishers styles of lists. I'm going to go ahead and include them in this one. Uh, Lots of tanks. You end up either using other tanks in order to be more aggressive and like play your mid board and force your opponent to come out and deal with units that are really, really difficult to deal with. If they have to come out and use their like Meltas and Las Cannons to deal with the first tank, they could generally do it. They can usually do it against a second tank, but by the time you're asking them to kill a third Lehman Russ Vanquisher, it becomes very, very difficult for them to still have sufficient anti-tank. Other ways that you can do it, of course, is you can play with a bunch of different smaller things. You oftentimes see either like Kazarkan and transports or units of 60 points that are like Krieg engineers or horses, and we'll see a bunch of different variants of those to force your opponent to play the game and come into range of your guns. To start off with, we have Daniel Latham at Didcot Team Tournament going 4-0. He's playing 2 Cadian Command Squads, Lord Solar, a San Command Squad, an Ogren Bodyguard, 1 Rogaldorn Commander, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 unit of 10 Catachan, 2 units of 10 Death Corps of Krieg, 2 units of 5 Rough Riders, 2 units of 5 Krieg Engineers, 1 unit of 5 Ratlings, 1 unit of 5 Scions, 3 Lemurus Vanquishers, and 2 Rogaldorn Battle Tanks. So we see here a lot of those small units in the 60-point range, Rough Riders, Engineers, Ratlings, kind of Death Corps of Krieg, and the Catachan as well, taking up a lot of space. And I'm generally going to be assuming that one of these Canadian command squads is attached to an Ogre Bodyguard to go probably stand on your natural objective where they are rather obnoxious to remove. And then with all of this, you do have a lot of tank. You have a lot of damage coming out between the 3 Luminous Vanquishers, the Rogaldorn Battle Tank, and of course the Rogaldorn Commander. So a lot of opportunities to play relatively open boards, very efficient trading pieces, and with this, Daniel ended up beating 20-0 into Eldar, smaller win into Custodes before a couple of big wins into Guard and Emperor's Children. Uh, Across the pond in the Surrey Primarchs, we have Jerome Conley going 5-0 with a fairly similar style of list overall. Cadian Command Squad, Scion Command Squad, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 unit of 10 Catachan, 2 units of 10 Krieg, 3 Chimeras, 1 unit of 5 Death Riders, 3 units of Kazarkin, 1 unit of 5 Scions, and 2 Lemur's Vanquishers. So, of course, what we look at with Daniel Latham using very efficient, cheap pieces to just kind of go stand places, but they don't tend to do a lot of damage. They are mostly just going to be move blocks. Jerome going with a style that has a little bit more damage. The Kazarkin and the Chimeras are much more effective skirmishing pieces that can actually do damage on their own, and so this means that you're less reliant on having a bit more damage in the backfield in order to deal with all of these threats, because you're going to be doing supplemental damage right off the bat when the Kazarkin and the Chimeras actually go in. Jerome here ends up getting a big win at Emperor's Children, a small win at Ultramarines, bigger win again into Sisters, a medium win into Tau, and once again a big win into Custodes. Moving on, back to the United States, we had a Brush and Blade, another relatively big event in the American Midwest. This one by Scott Cairns playing Hammer of the Emperor, very heavily inspired, maybe a direct copy, or at least very similar to what David Gaylord was playing at BFS, Battle for Salvation, a couple of weeks ago. Scott Cairns went 4-1 this weekend with Gaunt's Ghost, Lord Solar, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, an Engine Seer, a Hellhound, Luminous Exterminator, 3 Luminous Vanquishers, a Rogaldorn Battle Tank, and 2 Scout Sentinels. So again, lots of tank here, lots of ability to just force your opponent to play open boards and shoot them with the fact that you have so many tanks, so much damage coming out of this, and I know because it was being played on Games Workshop terrain for the most part, or at least a mix of Games Workshop and WTC, you have a lot of freedom to just force your opponent to come out into the open. Scott ended up getting a small win into Orcs, a big win into Emperor's Children, a small loss into Eldar before getting 2 big wins back-to-back into Imperial Knights and Emperor's Children. At the same event, we also had Robert Moreland at Brush and Blade, going 2 wins, 2 losses, and a draw. This is a very similar list, if not the same list that we saw him play at a GT a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago. Cadian Command Squad, Ministorum Priest is just a 35-point dude to walk around and do things. 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, Ursa Creed, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 2 Luminous Vanquishers, 2 Rogaldorn Battle Tanks. That's a total of 4 Rogaldorns between 2 commanders and 2 Rogaldorn Battle Tanks. 3 units of 5 Rough Riders, 1 unit of 5 Death Riders, 2 units of 5 Kree Engineers, and 1 unit of 5 Ratlings. So once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units that all cost 60 points between the Rough Riders, Death Riders, Engineers, and Ratlings, forcing your opponent to come out and play the game relatively early against units that are very fast, a little bit annoying to remove, and can beat up like cultists and sometimes scout marines and other similar things. Robert here ends up going a draw into Votan, a relatively surprising loss to me against Eldari, 2 medium wins against Emperor's Children and Blood Angels, and then a small to medium loss into Drukari as well. Over in Canada, we have Jonah Sinclair, another player who every single time I see him showing up with something that I always feel like Jonah plays kind of wonky lists that I always feel like probably shouldn't work, but he's consistently making them do rather well. So, it just kind of goes to show if you understand a certain list, it is very, very strong. Something about Bruce Lee not fearing the man who's practiced 10,000 different kicks, but who rather the man who has practiced the same kick 10,000 times. So Jonas Sinclair here going Kading Command Squad, Gaunt's Ghost, 2 Luminous Commanders. Again, I cannot stress enough how much I do not like this data sheet, but Jonah makes it work. Lord Solar, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 unit of artillery with a siege cannon, 1 unit of Cadian mortars. Again, another data sheet that if it was Catachan mortars would be the same thing, but better in a couple of matchups. 1 unit of 5 Ratlings, 3 Luminous Exterminators, so lots of autocannons coming out here that can buff each other and make each other do a little bit more damage. 2 Luminous Vanquishers, and 2 Scout Sentinels. So, plays kind of similarly to what we saw from Scott Cairns, where you're using the Vanquishers and the Exterminators to kind of create a lot of space for some of your other units to get all of their damage in. But it just does enough damage that your opponent just has to deal with it. They have to come out relatively quickly. And this, of course, loves playing on relatively open boards. Jonah ended up having some really swingy games overall. A 20-0 into Chaos Knights, a 0-20 into Emperor's Children, a 20-0 into Imperial Knights, an 8-12 into World Leaders, and a 13-7 into Tyranids. Moving across the pond, once again, we have David Gaylord at the Games Workshop Open in Maastricht in the Netherlands, going 7-1 with a pretty similar list to the one that he played over at BFS, but this one changes out a couple of pieces for a little bit more consistency in terms of scoring. David had Gonskos, a Lord Solar, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, an Engine Seer, 2 units of 5 Krieg Engineers, and a Taurox. Luminous Exterminator, 3 Luminous Vanquishers, a Rogaldorn Battle Tank, and a Scout Sentinel. I believe the changes made between, because I think this is almost exactly the list that we saw from David at BFS. Maybe there was an enhancement or something that I missed while I was noting this one down, but David Gaylord going over to Maastricht ended up taking out a couple of enhancements, taking out the Hellhound in order to put in 2 units of 5 Kryn Engineers, and removed a Scout Sentinel as well in order to get a Taurox. So that ends up being 125 plus the 55 is 130, 180 for the Hellhound and Scout Sentinel, and this time you have 60, 120 plus 175 is 195 altogether, I believe, for the Engineers and the Taurox. So there must be like some enhancement that got pulled out somewhere here for David. David ended up going 7-1, losing in the 7th round at Maastricht, beating CSM, Space Wolves, Votan, Tau, Orcs, Emperor's Children. A really close game here into Ultramarines before beating Emperor's Children again at the very end. And I believe he got 7th overall, losing in the 7th round. We have a couple more lists to show you guys, not a whole lot of brand new stuff. But we have a very classic archetype here in the midboard and tanks. This is mostly just playing a lot of relatively efficient stuff in the midboard and supporting it with a couple of tanks. Not entirely dissimilar to the way that a lot of Doombolt lists kind of play, but they generally are lacking some of the more core pieces that you see in Doombolt. So to start off with, we have Jens Haraldsson at Fantasia Fanatic 49. I think that's 49, XLIX. Pleasant Grizzled Company, of course, going 4-1 at this singles event. Jens was playing Cadian Command Squad, 2 Silent Command Squads, Rogel Doran, Ursa Creed, 1 unit of 20 Cadians, 2 units of 10 Catachan, 3 Chimeras, 3 units of 5 Rough Riders, 1 unit of 6 Bulgren with no Commissar, a little bit uncommon, 2 units of Kazarkin, and 2 units of 10 Scions. So 2 really big bricks of Scions. They come down, they will kill basically anything you want them to, but a little bit interesting that there's not actually a whole lot of like tanks in this, right? The only real tank in this is the Rogodorn Commander. Then you have the 3 Chimeras that can run around, and they will be helping out with the skirmishing with the Kazurkin, one of them presumably having the Catachan inside. But you have a lot of freedom to kind of drop wherever you want with these Scions, and they do a lot of damage. They do comparable damage to the tanks when you just drop them down, but they are really, really good at killing Marines, and they tend to struggle to punch up a little bit into some of the more durable units, like anything that's like toughness or toughness 10 or higher and a 2-up save. So ends up being a bit of an interesting list coming out from Jens. He ends up getting an 11-9 into Admech, a 20 into Death Guard, a 3 into Drukhari before getting 15 into Votan, and a 19 into Deathwatch. So congratulations to Jens at having the 4-1 at this event. Moving over to, I believe this is in Oregon, American West Coast, we have Squeak City Casino Royale. Tom Martin, a player who's shown up a couple of times and will probably show up next weekend as well, because he and I are going to the same team tournament. Tom is playing Caden Command Squad, Gunskos, Lord Solar, a Scion Command Squad, Sly Marbo, an Engine Seer, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 unit of 20 Krieg, 2 Chimeras, 2 Toroks, 1 unit of 10 Rough Riders, 3 units of Kazurkin, 1 unit of 5 Krieg Engineers, 1 unit of 5 Scions, a Leominers Vanquisher, and a Rogothorn Battle Tank. So one of the big things I know about Tom's local meta is there is a lot of Tau being played in that local area. So he is kind of valuing the ability to have the blank on the Rogothorn Battle Tank as well as the Engine Seer for the 4-up Invul. And just a lot of speed coming out between the 2 Toroxes with Kazurkin and the Chimeras. So a very, very fast set of units to play on the board. And a couple of interesting tech pieces here as well, with Slime Marble running around to either stand on your natural in a couple of shooting matchups where you don't think your opponent can get to them, or to potentially just run around and do actions, because he is, a pretty reasonable lone up to have. Overall, Tom went 4-1 at the event, beating CSM, Custodes, GSC, losing to the winner of the event in CSM, and beating Orcs to close it out. So congratulations to Martin on another 4-1 this weekend. I've got last couple of lists to show you guys that are a little bit different, a little bit different from some other things that we have seen so far. Yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. First one we have is Brian Moody at Brush and Blade. Once again, one of the most die-hard bridgehead specialists in the world, continuing to play it well after most of the rest of the community has moved on. But Brian going 3 wins and 2 draws at Brush and Blade, having a Caden Command Squad, a Catachan Command Squad, 3 units Scion Command Squads, Ursa Creed, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 unit of 20 Catachan, 2 units of 10 Krieg, 3 units of 10 Scions, 3 units of 10 Krieg Engineers, 3 units of Krieg Flamers, 1 unit of 5 Ratlings, 2 units of Aquilons, and a Cyclops. Now, this list is rather interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One, there are no enhancements in it, and I think there are some pretty darn good enhancements for Team's Bridgehead, particularly the no Overwatch enhancement, and I also really, really value the Bombast Vox, the one that I always call Cool Radio Man, because he can give out the same order 3 different times. It makes it really, really easy to bump up some of the survivability. Or yeah, it's mostly the survivability, because you usually go like first rank fire, second rank fire, because you're getting a +1 to hit when you drop. But you also get access to take cover. So suddenly you have a bunch of Scions with 3-up saves, which are pretty cool. The other interesting things here, of course, are the fact that there are no Kazurkin, and here they're all the units of Krieg Engineers and the Krieg Flamers. So the Krieg Engineers, the 10-mans, are obnoxious to remove because they are just 10 4-up bodies that as long as you have 1 alive, they will oftentimes throw a second grenade anyway. But the Krieg Flamers are relatively slow, and they don't really make great use of the fact that Bridgehead has those reroll 1s. So they are a little bit better at killing like Marines, but the entire detachment is so good at killing Marines anyway that they are relatively surprising inclusions to me. I think that if I were to try and play this list, I would probably substitute these out for some kind of mortars and really lean into the fact that I'm trying to hunt down toughness 3 or toughness 4 armies like Blood Angels or Eldar or Drukhari and try and carve out that niche. Either way, Brian ended up going 3 wins and 2 draws, getting a 20 into Drukhari, a draw into Eldar, a 15-5 into Death Guard, a 10-10 into Votan, and a 13-7 into Blood Angels. Always excited to see what Brian Moody is doing, because it's always, like we said, a little bit off the beaten path. Lastly, we have a couple of players that I have been less familiar with. The first one is Hunter Boyd, going 5-0 at Brush and Blade. Not a player that I think I've seen play guard in the past, but Hunter with a Cadian command squad, Commissar with Abhuman Detail, Gaunt's Ghost, 2 Scion command squads, a Rogaldorn commander, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 Torox, 1 unit of 5 Rough Riders, 2 units of 6 Bulgrin, a Field Ordnance battery, 2 units of 5 Krieg Engineers, 2 units of 5 Scions, an Armored Sentinel, and 2 Luminous Vanquishers. I'm not gonna lie, I think this list is a little bit odd in ways that I don't necessarily think are the best. Firstly, I really don't think the Armored Sentinel has play in ways that are useful. The biggest thing about this is I actually think the Armored Sentinel is kind of a liability because it is simply just one round base that makes it really, really easy for your opponent to get slingshots off of. So you have to be very, very careful with the way that the Armored Sentinel is positioned on the board to make sure you are not letting your opponent get a ton of free movement by charging off of this unit. It's also not that difficult to kill, and it really just doesn't do anything other than being kind of difficult to kill. So I'm not super fond of that. I'm also not super fond of the Field Ordnance Battery. It does make a couple of matchups a little bit easier, but other than that, it ends up not fighting for the middle of the board in ways that you kind of want to. Um, Overall, though, it is still fairly close to similar things like the Spanish Special, right? With Rogel Dorans, couple Vanquishers, couple maybe a unit or two of 6 Bulgrin, and the artillery overall. And so it does skirmish reasonably well. It plays the whole game just kind of okay. So you really have to understand what you do better than your opponents with this kind of list in order to really leverage all of those tools. Hunter ended up getting a couple of small wins into GSC and Chaos Knights, and then big wins into Custodes and Votan before a small win into Custodes to close it out with a 5-0. Lastly, we have Martin Cooper at Hellstorm Team Tournament playing another fairly similar list overall, actually. Martin was running Cadian Command Squad, a Commissar with Abhuman Detail, Gaunt's Ghost, Rogaldorn Commander, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 2 units of 10 Catachan, 1 unit of 10 Krieg, 2 Chimeras, 2 units of 6 Bulgrin, 1 unit of Kazarkin, 2 units of 5 Krieg Engineers, and 2 Lemur's Vanquishers. So I'm not going to lie. While Hunter did have a good weekend overall, basically, I do think that Martin Cooper has more or less the same list, but kind of better in almost every way. If I was being forced to pick between the two, it would definitely be Martin Cooper's version. Kind of like we're looking at the Fob trading out 1 for 1 with the Kazarkin. Um, then you don't have the Armored Sentinel, which I think is a bit of an issue. The only thing that I kind of would like to have seen in Martin's list is some access to Scions because they are so good in Grizzle Company. But instead, just going directly with the immediate brawl on the board, and it ends up working out as well. Martin Cooper here ends up getting a big win into Custodes, an 11-9 into Guard, a medium win into Grey Knights, a big win into Dark Angels, and a medium win once again into Eldar. And that's the last list I have to show you guys. It has been a very busy weekend for me, so sorry about getting this one out a little bit late. Hope you guys have enjoyed taking a look at this. I will have a couple of videos coming out in the next couple of days with the roundtables for some of the new detachments. The one for Steelhammer was a little bit more comedic than I was kind of expecting. Definitely not one of the more competitive detachments. Armored Infantry, a little bit more informative, so I hope you guys do really appreciate that. I will also have another video coming out about my time playing at my most recent teams tournament at OC5s, where I'll talk about the games that I played with Recon Element at those. Again, if you're interested in coaching or in the Discord, make sure you hit me up on Reddit or on Discord. If you are trying to get coaching, the best way to contact me is on Discord about it. If you are interested, let me know, and I will send you a bit more information and a pamphlet. For now, though, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.